They burned brighter than any star in Hollywood's golden age, but off-screen they teetered on the brink of chaos. From fistfights in legendary studios to courtroom scandals, their out-of-control lives left a trail of broken careers and shattered reputations. In this series, we'll uncover the raw truth behind 20 old Hollywood icons whose real-life drama eclipsed even their most explosive on-screen moments. Strap in and don't look away. Errol Flynn. Few stars embodied swashbuckling charm like Errol Flynn, but behind that grin lay a man driven by reckless appetites. Known for wild parties and countless affairs, Flynn's most infamous moment came in 1942 when he was charged with statutory rape, an explosive trial that riveted the nation. Though acquitted, the scandal tarnished his image, prompting studios to rein him in and banish him from A-list roles for a time. Off-screen, Flynn was notorious for drunken brawls, once pistol-whipping a neighbor over a parking dispute. Rumors swirled that he kept a hidden cache of weapons. True or not, they added a dangerous aura around him. Directors grudgingly tolerated his behavior because his box office draw was undeniable, but his unpredictability made every shoot a gamble. On location in Trinidad, his parties grew so rowdy that local authorities threatened to deport him. In the end, his health suffered too. Years of excess left him battling heart disease and cirrhosis. By the late 1950s, Flynn's career had cratered. Leading roles dried up, and he was stranded making low-budget films far from Hollywood's bright lights. He died at age 50 of a heart attack, leaving behind a legacy as tangled as his knife-sharp jawline. Beloved on screen, feared off it, and ultimately undone by his own appetites. Robert Mitchum. If Hollywood ever had a resident outlaw, it was Robert Mitchum. With his rugged looks and laconic drawl, Mitchum was cast as the embodiment of danger. But in 1948, life imitated art when he was arrested for marijuana possession. Sentenced to 60 days in jail, Mitchum spent his time reading poetry and charming guards with his wry wit, emerging only more mythic. Studios fretted, could this bad boy be relied upon? But audiences were hooked, and the scandal only fueled his rising star power. Mitchum's locker room brawls and persistent refusal to toe the studio line became legendary. He once walked off the set of Heaven Knows Mr. Allison over a salary dispute, forcing producers to grovel. His reputation as unmanageable made him both dangerous and irresistible. Directors approached him as one would a ticking bomb, unsure whether he'd deliver brilliance or implode entirely. Yet his fearless attitude gave his performances an edge no contract-bound actor could match. Despite the risk, Mitchum's career never truly suffered. His raw intensity continued to land him lead roles in noir masterpieces like Out of the Past. Though he never fully shook the Rogue label, he turned it into a brand, proving that sometimes the studio's biggest headache could also be its greatest asset. Marlon Brando. When Marlon Brando stormed onto the screen in A Streetcar Named Desire, Hollywood saw genius and menace. Brando's method acting revolutionized the craft, but his off-screen life was marked by fiery outbursts, on-set tantrums, and a willful disdain for authority. Directors dreaded his mood swings. One day he'd deliver a hauntingly vulnerable performance, the next he'd refuse to show up, disappearing for days amidst rumors of barroom brawls in New York City streets. His relationship with director Elia Kazan fractured completely during the filming of On the Waterfront. Brando publicly derided Kazan's artistic choices, accused him of betrayal, and nearly quit the picture altogether. That same year, paparazzi captured Brando in a fistfight outside a Manhattan nightclub, an image that ran across newspapers, branding him as unpredictable and dangerous. Studios quickly learned that working with Brando was a high-stakes gamble. They had to grant him unprecedented creative control to keep him on board, forever altering the power dynamic between star and studio. While his individuality reshaped Hollywood's creative landscape, it also limited his career. Many producers opted for more reliable talents, and Brando spent years fighting to reclaim the roles he deserved. By the 1970s, Brando was a self-imposed exile, choosing remote islands over red carpets. His legacy remains complex, a trailblazing artist whose tempestuous behavior both broke and made him. Richard Burton. Richard Burton's voice could melt hearts, or ignite tempers. A heavy drinker and fierce intellect, Burton's off-screen life was dominated by alcoholism and a tempestuous marriage to Elizabeth Taylor. Their on-again, off-again romance played out in tabloids, but it was Burton's violent, drunken rages, shattering glassware, hurled insults, physical altercations, that cemented his reputation as unstoppable. On the set of Cleopatra, Burton and Taylor's passionate affair derailed productions, doubling budgets and stretching schedules. Burton once stormed off set after a disagreement with director Joseph L. Mankiewicz, forcing a week-long shutdown. His public scenes of jealousy, chasing paparazzi cars through London streets, made him as notorious for drama off-camera as on. Burton's immersion in excess took a toll. His voice grew hoarse, his health deteriorated, and studios became wary of casting him in high-budget films. Roles slowed to a trickle, reserved only for projects willing to accommodate his personal chaos. Yet when he was sober, his performances retained a raw, emotional power unmatched by peers. In later years, Burton sought sobriety, but the damage was done. The once bankable star who stormed the gates of Hollywood found himself marginalized, remembered as much for his destructive impulses as for his Shakespearean brilliance. John Barrymore. John Barrymore was the very definition of genius made tragic. Hailed as the great profile, his Shakespearean command on stage and silver screen charisma were legendary, but so was his insatiable thirst for drink. By the 1930s, Barrymore's performances were overshadowed by his morning-after stumbles, slurred lines, and frequent no-shows. Studios assigned fixers to keep him on track, feeding him milk of magnesia to stave off hangovers and coaching stand-ins to cover for his absences. On the set of Svengali, Barrymore arrived so inebriated that he could barely stand, prompting director Tony Gulliver to film around his wobbling frame. Tabloids gleefully recounted tales of Barrymore collapsing mid-scene or passing out in his dressing room, earning him nicknames like the Ancient Mariner. His mounting unreliability drove producers to recast him in smaller roles, stripping him of leading man status. The man who once earned $5,000 a week found himself begging for work in forgettable B-movies. Heartbroken by his own decline, Barrymore descended further into addiction, his health failing rapidly. When he died at 60, the world mourned not just an actor, but a cautionary legend. A man whose brilliance was as dazzling as his self-destruction was inexorable. His final years remind us that even the brightest star can burn out when life spirals out of control. Mickey Rooney. A pint-sized dynamo on screen, Mickey Rooney's off-camera life was a whirlwind of extravagance and self-destruction. By the late 1940s, he was Hollywood's top box office draw. But behind the boyish grin lurked a man driven by debts, booze, and betrayals. Rooney gambled away fortunes, racking up millions of dollars in loans and unpaid taxes. At parties, he'd swagger through the room, glass in hand, provoking friends and strangers alike into drunken dares that often ended in bruises or broken furniture. His marriage count climbed as quickly as his checkered bar tabs. 8 in total, and each divorce further drained his resources. Studio executives, who once bent over backward to showcase his youthful energy, grew wary. By the mid-1950s, Rooney's name no longer guaranteed ticket sales. Producers balked at financing projects with him. On the set of low-budget musicals, he would vanish for hours, reappearing hungover and demanding rewrites. His ferocious temper sent costumers and crew running for cover, and once he famously stormed off a soundstage, shouting obscenities into the Los Angeles night. By the 1960s, Rooney had tumbled from household name to cautionary tale. Roles dried up and he was relegated to bit parts and TV guest spots. It wasn't until decades later, when he penned his memoirs and spoke candidly of his regrets, that the industry remembered the child star they once celebrated. Now humbled, haunted by choices that derailed a once stellar career. James Dean. James Dean's explosive talent burned too hot for Hollywood's kiln. In the brief window between 1955 and 1956, he made 3 films: East of Eden, Rebel Without a Cause, and Giant. But his real-life persona was equally volatile. Dean's need for speed manifested in late-night drag races on Mulholland Drive. He bragged about topping 120 miles per hour and once survived a near-fatal crash that left him with lingering fractures and a bad leg. Friends recalled his manic intensity. One evening, after a shouting match over creative control, he smashed a bottle against a bar mirror, slicing his hand and raining glass shards across the floor. His reputation for disappearing on location shoots, roaring off in his beloved Porsche Spider to chase thrills, infuriated directors and producers. When he skipped rehearsal to attend an underground boxing match, Warner Brothers threatened to recast him. The fatal accident on September 30th, 1955, was almost poetic in its tragedy. Dean's Porsche collided at an intersection near Paso Robles, California. He was just 24. In death, his reckless spirit became legend, cementing him as the Golden Age's ultimate cautionary icon. Had he lived, studios planned to rein him in, but his brief blaze of glory, born of unbridled risk-taking, left an indelible mark on Hollywood's heart. Montgomery Clift. Montgomery Clift's haunted gaze defined screen acting, but off-camera demons stalked him relentlessly. A 1956 car crash left him scarred physically and psychologically, his face permanently altered, his confidence shattered. Seeking escape, he dove into alcohol and prescription drugs, wandering Hollywood gatherings in a haze. Colleagues whispering about his twitching hands and slurred speech became common, and his late arrivals to shoots threw entire schedules into chaos. On the set of Judgment at Nuremberg, Clift was barely recognizable. Prosthetics masked his disfigurement, but they couldn't hide his unsteady focus. Directors painstakingly shot around his impairment, while co-stars had to lead him to his marks. Studio heads were torn. Clift's emotive power was unmatched, yet every day with him carried the risk of breakdown or no-show. An infamous incident in Rome saw him collapse mid-scene, requiring paramedics to revive him before filming could resume. Despite the turmoil, Clift delivered some of his finest work in the late 1950s. Yet by the 1960s, roles dwindled. His once promising career was eclipsed by younger, more dependable stars. Clift died in 1966, age 45, leaving behind a legacy shadowed by what might have been, had addiction not stolen his brilliance. Lee Marvin. Lee Marvin's gravelly voice and rugged jawline suited his on-screen tough guy image, but off-set, he was a volatile powder keg. A decorated Marine in World War II, Marvin brought battlefield ferocity home, engaging in frequent bar fights and rumored street brawls. His beer-fueled confrontations landed him in police blotters from Los Angeles to New Orleans, earning the enmity of club owners and studio security alike. Producers tiptoed around him. On The Dirty Dozen, Marvin insisted on doubling his salary to tolerate restrictions on drinking during shoots. When he wasn't filming, he pushed his body to extremes, challenging co-stars to bare-knuckle bouts that sometimes left them bloody. One stunt accident nearly cost him an eye, yet Marvin shrugged off the injury, demanding the scene be reshot, still with one good eye. Studios accepted Marvin's rules because he was a bankable action star. Cat Ballou won him an Oscar. But by the 1970s, his reputation as uncontrollable began to bite. Directors hired temperamental ex-Marines to handle him on set, and budgets swelled to accommodate his whims. Though he never lost major roles, Marvin's later films lacked his earlier spark, his dangerous edge dulled by the very chaos that once fueled his legend. Orson Wells. Though celebrated as a director, Orson Wells was also a magnetic performer and equally tempestuous. His drinking was infamous. He'd sip whiskey throughout takes, occasionally slurring lines or forgetting cues. On Citizen Kane, Wells demanded endless rewrites, shooting 50 takes of some scenes simply to get the feel. His mercurial temperament led to midnight rewrites scribbled in hotel notebooks, leaving producers scrambling to secure extra days of shooting. Wells's flamboyant ego clashed with studio executives. After The Magnificent Ambersons was recut without his consent, he publicly denounced the final product, triggering a feud that saw RKO blacklist him. Wells wandered into Europe, financing his own films on shoestring budgets, often arriving at location inebriated, pushing crews to work through sleepless nights. Despite his brilliance, Hollywood found him too unruly. Offers from major studios dried up. Wells spent his later years in commercial voiceover gigs and passion projects that rarely saw the light of day. He died in 1985, leaving behind a reputation both revered and feared, a testament to the price of genius when left unchecked by self-control. Clark Gable. Clark Gable, the king of Hollywood, was revered on screen, but off-camera he reveled in danger. Gable's love of fast cars and high-stakes gambling fueled a reputation for living on the edge. He once wagered an entire week's salary on a single roll of the dice in a Santa Monica casino, winning and immediately doubling down for even bigger thrills. Behind closed doors, his drinking binges could stretch for days, during which he'd disappear from studio calls, forcing executives to delay entire shoots. On the set of Mutiny on the Bounty, Gable's explosive temper erupted after a co-star accidentally spilled coffee on his tailored suit. He threw a chair through a soundproof window, shattering glass across the stage and leaving crew members scrambling for cover. Word spread that working with Gable was like dancing with a gunpowder keg. At any moment, a spark could set off a blaze of fury. Despite his volatility, Gable's box office draw remained unshakable. Studios accepted his demands, private trailers stocked with liquor, driver chauffeurs for midnight joyrides, because his presence guaranteed sold-out theaters. Yet the toll on his personal life was steep. His 4 marriages crumbled under the weight of his infidelity and erratic behavior. By the early 1950s, his health began to falter. The same recklessness that made him legendary also eroded his well-being. When Gable died of a heart attack at 59, Hollywood mourned a titan, but his legacy was forever tinged by the chaos he courted. He showed that even a king could be undone by the thrill of losing control. Wallace Berry. Wallace Berry's booming voice and hulking frame made him a commanding presence on screen, but off-set he was a storm of violence and excess. Born in 1885, Berry rose to fame in silent films, yet his greatest battles played out behind the camera. Co-stars whispered of nights when he'd stomp through studio backlots, roaring drunken threats at anyone who crossed his path. In 1932, during the filming of Treasure Island, Berry got into a violent brawl with a crew member who refused to fetch another drink from his trailer. The fight spilled onto the dock, where Berry, for all his affable screen persona, landed a punch that broke ribs and nearly sank a small boat. Studio security had to escort him off the lot, and filming halted for 3 days. Yet his portrayal of Long John Silver became one of MGM's biggest hits, and executives chalked up the incident to artistic temperament. Berry's rages were fueled by alcohol. He drank constantly, often downing a bottle of whiskey before lunch. His mood swings strained relationships. Directors dreaded having to placate him, and costumers feared the moment he spotted their handiwork and declared it unfit for a sea pirate. Over time, roles narrowed to characters who matched his rough image, and leading lady parts vanished. By the late 1930s, his career plateaued as audiences turned to newer, more controlled stars. When Berry died in 1949, his obituary lauded his cinematic achievements, but the legend of his out-of-control fury lived on. He remains a cautionary example of how unchecked anger and addiction can eclipse even the greatest talents. Rosco "Fatty" Arbuckle. Rosco Arbuckle was one of silent cinema's brightest stars, until a scandal so explosive it nearly destroyed him. In 1921, Arbuckle was accused of manslaughter in the tragic death of silent comedy actress Virginia Rappe. The 3 subsequent trials, mired in lurid tabloid coverage, painted Arbuckle as an out-of-control reveler whose parties descended into depravity. Though ultimately acquitted, the damage was irreversible. His films were banned, and his name became synonymous with Hollywood's dark underbelly. Behind the headlines, Arbuckle's personal life unraveled. He battled depression and alcoholism, haunted by nightmares of that fateful party. Desperate for work, he changed his name and tried directing under pseudonyms, but whispers followed him everywhere. When he attempted a comeback in 1923, audiences jeered and theaters refused to play his films. Distraught, Arbuckle slipped deeper into drinking, often staggering onto comedy stages only to forget lines or collapse mid-rehearsal. His final years were spent in obscurity. He opened a small restaurant in New York City, where patrons recognized him only by the grotesque caricatures on his marquee. On June 29, 1933, Arbuckle died of a heart attack at 46, thinly veiled from the world that had once adored him. The man who popularized slapstick physical comedy is now remembered less for his innovations than for the scandal that consumed him. A sobering reminder that even those with the brightest talent can be undone by a single moment of chaos. To W.C. Fields. W.C. Fields's bizarre comic persona mirrored his off-screen persona, a hard-drinking misanthrope who despised children, dogs, and authority. Fields hoarded liquor in every corner of his home and film sets, often filming entire scenes with a whiskey flask tucked in his suit. His constant inebriation led to slurred lines and forgotten cues, forcing stagehands to prop him up between takes. On one occasion during the old-fashioned way, Fields arrived so intoxicated that he couldn't stand. The director had to shoot him reclining on a chaise, using camera angles to mask his inability to walk. Co-stars learned to improvise. When Fields blacked out mid-dialogue, they ad-libbed to carry scenes forward. Yet, his comedic genius shone through the haze, and audiences adored his irreverent wit. Fields's personal relationships suffered. He divorced twice amid rumors of abuse and public drunken tantrums. Studio heads tolerated his chaos because his films, such as It's a Gift, were box office smashes. But by the late 1930s, his health deteriorated. Cirrhosis and ulcers plagued him as he continued to raise a glass to his own demise. When Fields died of kidney failure in 1946, Hollywood lost one of its most unorthodox talents. His life, equal parts comedy and calamity, proved that genius often walks hand in hand with self-destruction. James Kagney. James Cagney's electrifying energy lit up the silver screen, yet behind the scenes, he was as unpredictable as any gangster he portrayed. Known for his explosive temper, Kagney once stormed off the set of Public Enemy when a prop gun jammed, furious that the mishap threatened his uninterrupted performance. He grabbed the camera himself and shot the scene, improvising lines until the crew capitulated. His clashes with studio boss Jack Warner became legendary. Kagney refused to be bound by the strict contracts of the era. He staged a walkout in 1935, challenging the studio system's grip on actors. Months of legal battles followed before he secured a more favorable contract, setting a precedent for performer autonomy. During this period, he drank heavily, seeking refuge in speakeasies and underground poker games, where fights often broke out. By the early 1940s, Cagney's reputation for insubordination made him both feared and revered. Directors hesitated to hire him without assurances he'd behave, yet his fiery performances in Yankee Doodle Dandy and White Heat earned him an Oscar and eternal acclaim. Ultimately, Kagney learned to channel his intensity into his craft, rather than conflict. He retired peacefully in the 1960s, living quietly until his death at 86. Though his wild side threatened to consume him, Cagney's will to shape his own destiny ensured he remained one of Hollywood's most unforgettable legends. Tyrone Power. Tyrone Power was Hollywood's romantic leading man, yet beneath the suave exterior simmered a penchant for reckless living. An ardent gambler, Power lost fortunes in baccarat dens in Paris and clandestine poker rooms in Los Angeles. His mood on set could shift as swiftly as the cards he dealt. Directors recall days when Power would storm off to nurse a losing streak, vanishing for hours before reappearing to deliver a flawless take, as if the thrill of high-stakes bets fueled his on-screen magnetism. Off-camera, Power's womanizing was legendary. He carried on passionate affairs with co-stars and socialites alike, leaving trails of broken engagements and shattered reputations. Studio heads, desperate to protect their investment, employed chaperones and strict travel curfews, but Power skirted every rule, once sneaking to a private island to be with an heiress, only to return with a duffel bag full of cash and whispered rumors of a clandestine card game that paid out six figures. Despite the chaos, his career thrived through the 1940s. Films like The Black Swan and Blood and Sand cemented his status as box office royalty. Yet by the early 1950s, the cost of his lifestyle became apparent. Health issues, ulcers, chronic fatigue, and the emotional strain of public scandal began to erode his reliability. Studios grew wary of his absences and last-minute cancellations, relegating him to fewer lead roles and lower budgets. Power's sudden death at 44 from a heart attack sent shockwaves through Tinseltown. Colleagues mourned the man who could conquer any role but was undone by his appetite for risk. Today, his legacy is bittersweet, a reminder that even the most polished star can be toppled by a restless heart and a deck of cards. Humphrey Bogart. Humphrey Bogart's tough guy aura on screen masked a man who lived dangerously off it. An inveterate drinker, Bogart was known to favorite speakeasies where he'd hold court, glass in hand, daring anyone to confront him. Tales abound of fistfights in dimly lit bars. One notorious brawl ended with Bogart and a rival actor trading haymakers until both were hauled off by police, bruised but unbowed. Bogart's private life was equally turbulent. His first two marriages dissolved amid accusations of infidelity and violent arguments. Co-stars described him bursting into hotel rooms unannounced, enraged by jealousy over on-set flirtations. During the filming of The African Queen, he reputedly threatened a cameraman who dared to adjust the camera without permission, jamming the man against the deck until crew members intervened. Warner Brothers tolerated his outbursts because his name guaranteed sold-out theaters. Films like Casablanca and The Maltese Falcon built on his edgy persona, blurring the line between character and actor. However, by the late 1950s, Bogart's health began to falter under the weight of constant stress and heavy smoking. He chain-smoked 4,000 cigarettes per month. Roles grew scarcer as producers worried about his reliability and mounting medical bills on set. Bogart died at 57 from esophageal cancer, a casualty of the very bravado that fueled his legend. His career remains a testament to the dangerous allure of living on the edge, and the tragic toll it can exact on even the biggest stars. Jack Palance. Jack Palance cut an imposing figure both on screen and off. His portrayal of villains was informed by real fists. Palance boxed professionally in his youth, and he never forgot how to throw a punch. On studio lots, he was feared for testing newcomers, reportedly challenging a group of rookie actors to unarmed combat after overhearing them mock his accent. Security intervened when Palance pinned one man to a wall, demanding an apology. Palance's love of danger extended to dramatic stunts. During Shane, he insisted on performing his own horse falls, leading to broken ribs and a fractured collarbone that shut down production for weeks. His refusal to use stunt doubles won the respect of crews, but also a reputation as an uncompromising perfectionist who'd endure excruciating pain rather than relent. Off-set, Palance was an adrenaline junkie. He raced motorcycles through the Hollywood Hills and once joined a late-night drag race against a friend's Corvette, nearly careening off a cliff when brakes failed. His reckless passion endeared him to some, but studios worried about ensuring his next film. Despite the risks, Palance's intensity translated into unforgettable performances in City Slickers and Shane, earning him 2 Academy Award nominations. Yet as he aged, accidents piled up and roles dwindled. Production companies began writing characters with early exits to minimize his screen time, a subtle acknowledgement that Palance's greatest danger was sometimes himself. Steve McQueen. Known as the King of Cool, Steve McQueen's off-screen life was no less thrilling than his on-screen escapades. A former Marine with a taste for speed, McQueen collected motorcycles and sports cars, customizing them for illegal street races along Mulholland Drive. His need for speed antics landed him in jail twice, once for reckless driving after a 3-car pileup that nearly claimed a pedestrian's life. He shrugged off the incident with a grin, remarking, "The winner never stops to take a look." McQueen's volatile temper made collaborations tense. Directors recall him storming off the bullet set after clashing over stunt sequencing, forcing them to rehire Doug Mattson as a body double at the last minute. His penchant for pushing limits led to on-set injuries, a broken rib during The Great Escape, and a dislocated shoulder filming The Hunter. He refused to rest until cameras rolled again. His risky lifestyle took a toll: chronic back pain, addiction to painkillers, and a reputation that made insurers demand higher premiums. Yet McQueen's raw magnetism filled theaters. The Thomas Crown Affair and Le Mans became hallmarks of 1970s cinema. In an ironic twist, his love of racing contributed to health issues that led to his untimely death from cancer at 50. McQueen's legacy endures as the archetype of the fearless rebel, a star who lived and sometimes died by his own rules, proving that true cool often flirts with catastrophe. Anthony Quinn. Anthony Quinn's name evokes passionate portrayals of doomed lovers and fierce warriors, but his off-camera persona could be equally tempestuous. A man of volatile mood swings, Quinn would oscillate between tender devotion and explosive rage. His first marriage ended after a violent confrontation. Quinn, jealous over a perceived slight by his wife, flung furniture in their New York apartment, sending a lamp crashing through a window. On set, his intensity manifested in dramatic confrontations. While filming Viva Zapata, Quinn demanded additional rehearsal time for a pivotal scene, berating the director and co-stars in a tirade that lasted hours. Crews tiptoed around him until he finally cooled down and delivered an award-winning performance. His raw, unfiltered emotion earned him 2 Oscars, but at the cost of strained relationships and skyrocketing budgets when productions needed extra days to accommodate his whims. Quinn's love of risk extended to his personal life. He once hired a lion tamer to bring a live lion to a Hollywood party, unleashing the creature for a thrilling photo op that left guests scrambling. Though the stunt passed without injury, studios took note. Quinn's imagination sometimes bordered on the dangerous. As Quinn aged, he learned to temper his impulses, focusing on painting and sculpture, outlets for his creativity that posed no threat to others. He died peacefully at 86, remembered as much for his artistic genius as for the fierce spirit that, unchecked, could burn too brightly. These were the 20 most dangerous old Hollywood actors whose unbridled passions and explosive tempers left indelible marks on the silver screen, and in many cases, their own lives. Their stories stand as haunting reminders that genius and self-destruction often walk hand in hand.